Hey guys, for my paper, I did my paper on Jose Mourinho. For those of you who don't know who Jose Mourinho is, he's a very successful soccer manager. He's managed 8 teams, and he has won a total of 22 trophies so far. So his background. So he was born on January 26, 1963, in Setúbal, Portugal. His mother was a primary school teacher, and he thanks his mother a lot for making him so involved in school because he loved school and it was a very important part of his life. Um, his father was a professional soccer player and actually represented Portugal once. And after that, he became a manager himself, managing teams from the 70s into the 90s. And his mom's brother was a very wealthy person in Setúbal. He was actually one of the wealthiest people there, and he actually funded and bought land to create the stadium there. And he talks about how they lived a very luxurious life at that time, but that all changed once his uncle passed away. He went from living this lifestyle to not, but life goes on. And his career. So, Mourinho played in the second tier. He wasn't a very gifted soccer player, and he knew that though. So, from an early age, in his teens actually, while his dad was a manager, he would actually write scouting reports for his father, and he figured out that hey, like, I'm good at this, I like this. So he focused more of his energy into managing rather than playing because he knew he wasn't going to make it far. Um, so once his playing career came to an end, he became a physical education teacher in Lisbon. And moving to Lisbon was huge because it introduced him to opportunities that were very important. Uh, in 1992, Englishman named Bobby Robson got hired to coach a sporting club of Portugal, and he needed a translator. And interestingly enough, since Mourinho was in the area, he thought he was the perfect guy for the job. So he hired Mourinho. And, after a while, he realized that Mourinho wasn't only a translator, he understood the game. They would talk tactics, they would, talk about the opposition, their own players, what they should do. Meanwhile, he's still a translator at this time, but, Bobby understood that, this guy actually knows what he's doing and what he's talking about, so he would listen to him. So after a season at Sporting Club, Robson actually got sacked and, had to leave after, which I thought was pretty weird because it's not like he wasn't successful there. He brought the team into third place, which isn't bad. But I guess that wasn't good enough for the club. So Porto then offered Robson to be their head coach there, and he brought Mourinho not along. He brought him along not only as a translator but actually as an assistant coach. And this is when his coaching stint officially began, and he was actually a part of the program and would help every single day. They were very successful in Porto. They won Champions League, which is huge. If you guys don't know what the Champions League is, it's basically the best club in Europe. And after Porto, they went to Barcelona. Once again, Robson brought him over, and I think that is huge and a very important time in Mourinho's career because Barcelona is one of the best clubs in the world and one of the biggest clubs in the world. So if you're there, even as an assistant coach, that is huge. You're learning from the best. You're around players that are the best. And funny enough, while he was at Barcelona, he created a very good bond with one of the players there that 13 years later becomes one of his rivals in the coaching world, and that is Pep Guardiola, which I find really funny because I'm a Pep fan. Um, but they had a very successful season there at Barcelona, and after one season, Robson moved up in Barcelona more of on the business side of things, and a new manager came, Louis van Gaal. And Louis Van Gaal, he's also, a very good manager. So I think it's also very important that Mourinho got this experience with not only Robson, but someone else that knows. I think once you work with other people, you start to realize what works, what doesn't, what philosophy you want to make your own. And this was huge for him. He then became, Van Gaal's assistant, and after 2 seasons, Van Gaal actually got sacked. So he parted ways with Barcelona, and that meant that Mourinho parted ways with Barcelona, and he actually called Van Gaal and was like, I want to go back home to Portugal. Should I go? And Van Gaal literally said, "Don't go if they're not going to be the head coach position. Go, um, only go for that. If they're going to make you an assistant, just stay here." He didn't listen. He went anyways. But lucky enough for Mourinho, while there, the head coach at Benfica got sacked, and Mourinho took over. Uh, this was the start of his career as a head coach, as a manager. But it didn't really last really long. A new president came in, and Mourinho was like, "Hey, like I want to improve my contract," and the president looked at him and was like, "No." So Mourinho, what he did, he quit right then and there. 9 games in, he quit, and he actually became unemployed for the rest of the season. But if you guys know his career, he went on to manage 7 more teams. So he, like I said, he managed Benfica, and after he became unemployed, he managed this next team. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he took over, and interestingly enough, he changed that club and that program around. This team was a team that wasn't always in the top, wasn't always in the bottom. They were just like always in the middle, and he changed that. By the end of his time with this team, they actually finished in third place above Porto and Benfica, which is huge because those two teams are one of the best teams in Portugal, if not the best teams in Portugal. So for Mourinho to do that, just shows us his capabilities as a manager. Um, After and his work there didn't go unnoticed. Like teams were like, "Wow, who is this guy?" And Porto was one of those teams and hired him. And once again, he changed that whole team. Um, he actually ended up winning the Champions League with Porto, which I think is pretty remarkable knowing the circumstances. While he was there, um, his team, they weren't young players. Most of the roster was actually in their late 20s, early 30s, and most of those players were only at Porto for less than 2 years. So, as a soccer player myself, as you get older, your body just is not the same. So, you can't compare a 20-year-old to a 29-year-old physicality wise, like, fitness wise. Yes, the older person might have more experience, but your body's just not going to keep up the same as someone that's 8 years younger. And chemistry, obviously, if this team has been together in less than 2 years, it's not like they're going to have the most amazing chemistry. That didn't matter to Mourinho, actually. He turned them around. They were actually very close to getting knocked out of the group stage, which is the first stage, but they managed to win 2 games and move on. And since then, they won every single game, and they beat Monaco in the final, and they won the Champions League for the second time in club history. And I think that just goes to show you who Mourinho is. From going from Benfica, from 9 games to turning this team that's always in the middle of the pack into a top 3 team. And then Porto, Porto was always at the top, but they were never Champions League champions caliber. And funny enough, 2 days after winning the Champions League, Mourinho leaves and he goes to Chelsea. And Porto ended up just being the same team again. Always maybe top 3, fighting to win, the domestic cup, but never won the Champions League. He then went to Chelsea, and he is the most successful manager in Chelsea history. He won 6 trophies in 3 years. After that, he went to Inter Milan, won some more trophies, went to Real Madrid, won some more trophies again, then went back to Chelsea, won a little more, and then he went to Manchester United. And once he went to Manchester United, he wasn't as successful. He actually got sacked last December. He started of the 2018-2019 season he led Manchester United to one of their worst starts in club history. Just wasn't good enough for the club. They sacked him, and since then he has not managed any team, which I find really interesting. I'm really curious to see where he's going to end up. But just because you have one bad, time doesn't mean that you're not a good manager. His stats and all the trophies he's won says he's a great manager, and he is. So when it comes to his leadership, I think that he's a charismatic and a transformational leadership. I wouldn't say that Mourinho's personality is, the best, but he believes in himself a lot. And if you believe in yourself and have that confidence, then your followers are going to do the same thing. And I think this was, really good for some of his teams, and I think it was really bad for some of his teams. And I think that one bad team being Manchester United, his ego got in the way. He didn't really care about losing as much. I mean, it was all about, that one win, that two win, and that really gets to you, and it builds a negative atmosphere within your club. But I also think it was good in other teams, and it shows. And I think he was a transformational leader because he turned a lot of teams around. And, to be that type of leader, I think is phenomenal. And I think it's really hard to do, from taking a team that never wins anything to winning all these things. I think, and not only doing it once, but doing it to every single team that you have gone to just shows the kind of leader that you are. People might not agree with him or like him, but you can't take that and say that he's not a good manager, because he is. So the summary is, he went from nothing to something. Who would think that you go from being a translator to being one of the best managers in the whole world? He changed the game with all of his success. He was a nobody, and people started to realize who he really was, and I think that's great. And to achieve all that success was his philosophy. He's a very defensive minded person. He would always wait for his opposition to make mistakes, and that's how they would win games at times. Sometimes they wouldn't even have a shot on net, but they would still win 1-0 because they would defend so good that the other team would make the mistakes and, score on themselves. And, I think he's a person that's very stubborn. He has not changed his ways, and he never will. And he stated that. He said, "I didn't change when I left Chelsea. I'm not going to change when I leave Manchester United." And I think that's really important as a person, to not change who you are for other people and stay true to who you are. And that's who Mourinho is. Whether you like him or you hate him, he's a great manager. And that is Jose Mourinho.